Hey, Nabila.
Hello, good morning. How are you?
I'm all right. How are you?
Good, thank you.
Have you heard from any of your other co-panelists on this?
No, I have not. The only person that contacted me was Anne yesterday to walk me through, yesterday's session.
Okay.
So that was great. But I'm a little bit unsure as to what the how it's going to be different today than from
Yeah.
yesterday, aside from like the topic.
Yes. So I think this group is pretty comfortable in their topic area. So Silverly,
Okay.
do you know
Yes.
Nika?
Nika, yes, I've just spoken to her, and then
Okay.
Kia from Jewish Family Services, right?
Yes. Yes.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Okay, good. So, and then Yvonne Liu from Insight Center.
Okay.
I would expect Yvonne to, you know what, this is pure speculation, but since Yvonne has a report that they just put out on matching, targeting, the importance of targeting GI to people who need it, quote unquote, the most, right? And that's Black women, because of just the cost of survival in California, that if you were to target a GI program to that population, it would make the biggest impact to their lives. So I suspect that there's some presentation, or maybe she'll talk about that report, but I don't know other things. So I'm going to be, I'm probably going to hang out most in this session. So I'll be in the background, able to chip in if it's not happening.
Will it be like a facilitator like in yesterday's conversation, or this is more of like a dialogue amongst the people in the space?
So I asked Silverly to facilitate.
Okay.
Right now.
So it will be, like if he facilitates, it'll still be more of a conversation style of like, what's like the future of guaranteed income, right?
Yeah.
I
think with this set of panelists, I've had the lightest touch because everybody seemed like we're good. We know what we're talking about. So now I'm starting to feel a little nervous, like maybe.
No, just because like Anne did such a great job yesterday and like setting the tone and like explaining it, like, listen, like, it'll be Rashawn, it'll be, Angel, like, so that allowed each of like the speakers to know when they were going to be called on, you know, so it was a really nice, I like it when like I'm in spaces where the panelists don't look confused and they know what they're doing. So it was a nice flow. So and everyone in this call is so knowledgeable, that, and she also told us like, you're going to have 5 minutes to speak and whatever. So then we knew to stay on point and, it allowed for a nice conversation and a nice flow of things. But I think we'll be fine too, either way.
Hi, Nika.
Hi, how are you?
I'm good. How are you?
Very well, thank you.
I actually have a cold, so if I sound like this. Where are you right now?
I'm in the UK.
You're in the UK. And did I read correctly that you're going to school?
Yeah, I'm finishing my PhD right now.
Oh my God. How many things do you not do? Like, I feel like you're just like. All right, here's Silverly. Hi.
Hello.
Hi, everyone. Sorry, is it recording right now? Okay.
It's recording, but I'll edit it for
okay.
when.
Okay, I'm gonna eat some cereal. Thank y'all for joining a little early. So I'm gonna ask very simple, like straightforward questions that I feel that are, for example, I'm probably gonna ask like, how did you get involved with the GI movement? What is the best way we could design a GI in California and in the country? What are things that are missing in the movement now, right? Stuff like that. So just kind of having y'all think about that. I don't intend to ask anything complex. We might get questions from the crowd too, which is fine. But I'm gonna try to keep it like very simple to like what y'all know. But I think things that we don't always talk about. I think people think about these things, but we don't actually like say it out loud. Like, what does it look like to actually have one in California? What are the components that are important? What does it look like in the country? How is GI impacting the safety net landscape? How are you thinking about that? So I'm gonna try to keep it within things that I know, because I know all of y'all and the work that you do to some capacity. So I'm not gonna try to throw any curveballs, but I'm gonna keep it very straightforward and honest. And yeah, do y'all have any questions, I guess? Any concerns?
Yvonne, Insight has that new report about targeting GI. So I want you to, if you could give them a chance, give Yvonne a chance to like go over their proposition that basically, since the cost of living is highest for Black women in California, that you know they're for the targeting of GI to the most impacted communities first. So Black women first, Black women best frame.
Okay, that's good. I can try to fill that. I'm hoping it kind of comes out in, you know, when she thinks about, when I ask the question about how you would best design a GI in California. Yeah. And then we can link her report somewhere. I think we can add attachments, right?
You can add a what?
Can we add attachments or no?
Yeah, you can in the chat. Hi, Kaya. So you see the little clip. You could add the attachment there and post the report. Also, it'd be great if you could, so we're at the end of, the last session today is going to be a conversation about policy priorities, and the building on the $35 million fund is on the table and is getting some support. So I would love your panelists' respective thoughts on how should we build, how should we build on it? Should we make this, I mean, and I think anything is welcome, right? Because I think we're at this stage in GI in California where it's both like a darling and people really like it, but it's like, it could really go anywhere, right? So I want to really open it up and talk about, you know, I don't know, dream big.
So you want us to kind of like brainstorm a little bit about the 35 million too, or like the GIPP expansion, right?
Opinions on how that's working, how it's not working.
Yeah.
I was sickest when the announcements were made, and so I didn't follow any of the conversation that may have happened on social media around who got the awards. I know it was only like about 5 groups that got, right?
Yeah.
And so I have no idea how that. I was surprised, but maybe that was.
Y'all were funded, right? Were you funded, Nabil? Yes.
We were funded. Yes.
Okay.
Yes. I don't know the details as to how much because I don't do programming as much as I do like the advocacy piece, but I can ask if there needs to be like, you know, some additional information on the amount of money that we received.
Okay.
They also only announced 25 million when there was a $35 million allocation. I'm wondering if it's because of like other costs.
Yeah.
like, overhead that they didn't think about. But I'm not sure.
Okay.
Yeah.
Nika, you.
It was 25 million for 7 programs, and then it was sort of dispersed across them, with some programs, most of them having 150 people, one having 650 people. And then each of the programs have their own disbursement partner and sort of implementation mechanisms.
Yeah. I'm just curious what happened or why it was 25 million, but I'm pretty sure it's overhead. It's my assumption, but oh, hi everyone. So I think our panel is going to get started in a little bit. Let's give time to folks to trickle in.
Hi everyone. So this is a workshop, and unlike a main stage event and a workshop, everyone who is attending the session will show up on the screen. So if you'd like to have, this is a message for everyone. If you'd like to be able to focus on who's speaking, the thing to do is to hover over the button that has the 3 little dots at the bottom of your screen, and you can scroll down there and change the layout. And then you can play with it as far as just having this like a sidebar feature where just the speaker and then everybody else is sort of on the along the side. Or you can keep it in tiled mode, but maybe limit it to, instead of 25 participants, you can sort of, maybe you only want to see, 5 or 6 people on the screen. So this is an option. This is sort of like, figure out whatever layout works best for you as an attendee, and definitely for the speakers. You can, manage, just what you see in terms of stimulation. I know as a speaker, things can get overstimulating pretty quickly. So you've got some options here. The chat box is always a great place to have your reactions. You can be a bit more formal and ask folks to ask questions in the Q&A, but that's completely up to you. So it looks like we've got a number of people trickling in. So I'll let you get started. Welcome everyone, and I'm gonna hop over to the other session and make sure everything is going okay there.
Awesome. All right. Thank you, Andrea, and thank you for everyone who's here joining us today. My name is Silverly. My pronouns are they, them, theirs, and I am one of the co-chairs for the California Guaranteed Income Community of Practice. It is an honor to facilitate and moderate this panel. We have wonderful experts here at the table, people who are organizers, researchers, implementers for guaranteed income. So we're really trying to have the conversation of what does the future of guaranteed income look like? We have seen a surge of guaranteed income pilots within the last 2 years. I believe there's over 100 guaranteed income pilots announced in the United States. So we are just seeing guaranteed income everywhere across the country. We're seeing the impacts of guaranteed income. It works. So this conversation is really focusing on like, what are people doing on the ground and what is their role in the movement? So we have wonderful panelists here with y'all today, and I'm gonna have them introduce themselves. So their name, their organization pronouns, and kind of what they do. So we have Nika, Nabila, Kia, and Yvonne. So I'm gonna go ahead and pass it to Nika first.
Hi everyone, thank you so much for having me. My name is Nika Sooncheong. I'm the executive director of an organization called the Fund for Guaranteed Income. And what we do is we partner with systems impacted people, community organizations, and also government agencies to design and implement guaranteed income pilots, but ultimately with our community design technologies and tools, what we hope to be a new era of service delivery. So I'm really grateful to be having this conversation.
Thank you. And I'm going to pass it to Nabila.
Good morning, folks. Nabila Sosa, National Council of Jewish Women, pronouns she, her, hers. And I'm the Advocacy Program Manager at the National Council of Jewish Women. We are the LA section. We've been historically in business for over 100 years, and our mission at the local level is advancing economic justice and equity. And part of that is understanding and becoming a leader in the GI movement. I'm excited to be here, honored to be with such amazing leaders. I look forward to hearing from everyone.
Thank you. And I'm going to pass it to Kea.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Kia Pollard, and I am the Economic Mobility and Opportunity Director at Jewish Family Service of San Diego. And our organization is also very old. It's been around for quite a while, but guaranteed income and cash transfer programs are fairly new in our portfolio. And so we have a few different types of programs that give families cash or will give families cash. And it's my team that kind of creates designs in partnership with our stakeholders and community partners. So I'm constantly thinking about what's going to happen in the future and kind of innovating towards that. So I'm excited to talk about that today.
Awesome. Thank you, Kia. I'm going to pass it to Yvonne, our last panelist.
Hi there. My name is Yvonne. My pronouns are she, her. I'm based in Los Angeles, California, and I'm the Director of Research with the Insight Center. We're a national economic justice organization that works to center Black women in our racial justice and economic justice policy and advocacy research. And we have also been doing a lot of work specifically around narrative with the guaranteed income movement. And as an aside, I also teach a course on welfare policy where guaranteed income was a big part of the demands of the welfare rights movement. So it's just really exciting to see it sort of flourish and grow in the current incarnation.
Awesome. Thank you, everyone. And for folks who are joining, feel free if you have questions to put them in the chat and we'll try to get through it. So I have a couple of questions for our panelists, and then we can leave it open to like more of an open forum if folks have in the audience have questions. So the first question that I have for everyone, and anyone can start, is how did you get involved with the GI movement? Who would like to go first?
I can go first. Personally, I'm still learning as I go. I think that for me, I'm very grateful to be part of this panel because here within, the guest speakers are powerhouses, folks that have been doing the GI movement even before we began our tiny, small pilot at NCWLA. But what we are learning is that through GI, when we really think about advancing economic justice and equity, we're really thinking about changing the narrative in the way in which we think that resource should be given to those that need it the most. I feel like GI is a way and a vehicle for people to lift themselves out of poverty and to really begin to give them the autonomy and the freedom and the dignity that they deserve. Oftentimes, if we think about historically welfare policies, they have been very suppressive, and they have been really a way in which they're still trying to control the way people spend and we think about money. So really, you said it very well when you were with us in our own training last week, that low-income folks oftentimes are the most resourceful and they are inventive because they know how to stretch a dollar. So to imagine that an additional $500 or $600, what that could do for someone's livelihood and future generations, I think that it's exciting within the movement. And that's how we became part of this, right? To really think about innovative ways to begin to destigmatize and give people that dignity that they deserve and the ability to uplift themselves out of poverty.
Thank you, Nabila. Go ahead, Nabila.
I don't know if I can follow that answer, but just to echo everything that was just said and to say that for me personally, I'm an anthropologist of bureaucracy by training, and for the past 10 years before starting Fund for Guaranteed Income, really focused on public procurement, government systems design, cash transfer implementation mechanisms, and really recognized guaranteed income as a powerful idea that can translate into deeper policy conversations that get to those systems that have been built, just like you said, systems that have been built, which our taxpayers pay for, which are constructed to maintain structures of inequality. And we have confusing welfare systems that cost $361 billion a year, that leave people unsupported, that are difficult to navigate. And what guaranteed income does is it makes the statement that reimagining community is not an exercise for bureaucrats. And it has this revolutionary potential of saying, you won't get this money if you don't spend it on a drink every once in a while, if you look for a job and show us all the receipts that you did look for a job, if you only buy certain types of food and promise not to buy other types of food. And it's really an investment to say, this is not to transform your life, but because you are alive. And that can change not just the way we think about money, but the way we think about value, our human values, our societal values. And it translates that animating moral statement into a deeper look into the systems that exist today and what should be possible tomorrow.
I can go next. This panel is preaching this morning. I'm going to keep mine sort of short and sweet. I love those responses. I was actually working on a parallel track before coming to Jewish Family Service, which is a large organization in our region. I was running a cooperative coffee shop that's focused on economic mobility and first stability. We were really ramping up the galvanizing the community around this idea during the time of COVID. So it was first about helping people get money and get stabilized as quickly as possible economically, but also my background in government and public policy led me to a for-profit kind of focus because I wanted to help my community create generational wealth. So COVID hits, people need money. We're like, how do we get people money fast? We start talking about the Black Women's Resilience Project because I'm primarily focused on the Black community in San Diego. And guaranteed income comes up in our conversations. Jewish Family Service approaches because they're doing a program that they'd love to launch. We come together and we bring all of our energy and focus on making this a regional portfolio of work focused on giving families what they need now and doing it in a dignified way that could also transform the way that organizations provide services in our region, moving away from patriarchal forms of program design and the way that we work with government, and really think about how we can do that differently and change our service model. And then from there, kind of advocate locally at a state level, and then with our partners in the larger movement on a federal level. So I got in there in a strange kind of turn of events, but I'm loving it. It aligns very, very much with my focus on generational wealth building and actually doing it in a way that is non-traditional and more in sync with the adaptable nature or the changing nature, the dynamic nature of what's going on the ground. So that's me.
I think I might be last. So I'll say that, we are not practitioners. We don't run a guaranteed income program. We, primarily do research and narrative change work. But we have been sort of, leaders in the field of the racial wealth gap for the last 20, 30 years. And I think it was that work that led my organization, the Insight Center, to think about different types of policy solutions that can help to build wealth and help people to, survive and thrive in this economy. And I think, as I mentioned, I think a big piece of our work, which echoes a lot of what the other panelists have said, has been sort of being really critical of the whole narrative around deservedness, that, people who people of color in particular who are, punished when they are given assistance, and they are, given different requirements and different sort of disciplinary measures in order to receive aid. And our, response has always been, people deserve need because we are human, because we exist on this world. And then I would say that, just personally, it was really exciting to hear Kia talk about their work in a cooperative coffee shop. My background is also in building solidarity economies, in reimagining, a different kind of economy that can actually sustain people and the planet. And so I think that, if we're thinking about the future of, where we can go with an economy that helps everyone, I think guaranteed income, especially one that is targeted towards those who most need it, is going to be a big piece of that.
Awesome. Thank you all for sharing. It seems like we, like I said earlier, we have wonderful folks that are doing the implementation, the research, the organizing, which are all like important parts to what's necessary, important for the movement for guaranteed income and establishing a guaranteed income. So we also kind of lead into this question. I think Yvonne kind of set it up, but I'm wondering, what do y'all think, like in what ways can GI transform our current social safety net? I think we always hear about guaranteed income being different, unique, and impactful because it gives people autonomy and it trusts people with resources. So I'm wondering, like, in what ways do you think guaranteed income can transform our current social safety net system?
Well, I could pick that up if that's okay, and maybe start us off. So, I think, so I mentioned that I study welfare policy and I teach about it. And so I think one of the things that our current social safety net system has been structured on sort of anti-Black and patriarchal values that really, has behavioral requirements for recipients of welfare, and also sort of looks at people who need assistance as having some type of social pathology that needs to be addressed, that needs to be rehabilitated. I think, if we start with the premise that everyone, deserves to live a dignified and sustained life, regardless of whether we work, regardless of whether we're married, regardless of whether we have children and, the number of children that we have, I think we, can have a safety net that aids those who most need it, who identifies those who most need it and aids them, regardless of these, variable factors. So I think, it'll be interesting to see in the next few years as we see guaranteed income pilots turn into policy, into permanent policies, and to see it being adapted, into our current social safety net system. And hopefully that these sort of, broader frameworks of, everyone deserving aid, makes its way into the permanent program.
Thank you. Nika, go ahead.
I really want to echo that. And I think guaranteed income can transform the conversation and unbracket it from these outdated frames of reference that almost take as a foregone conclusion that the problem is actually welfare fraud, or the problem is that people are quote unquote unmotivated. And a policy like guaranteed income can really redress the ugly history of welfare in America, which has to understand the fact that the first Social Security Act in 1935 left out 65% of Black workers from unemployment. It excluded agricultural and domestic workers from unemployment benefits. That the first federally sponsored program for women benefited 95% of white women only. And on top of this, we have automated related job loss, and it's in this context that COVID hit and is compounding these structural inequalities. And I think as you were saying, Yvonne, the political home of guaranteed income is actually tied to advocacy. It's tied to point 2 of the Black Panthers' 10-point plan. And it shouldn't be co-opted from this narrative that we need, tech is taking over jobs and we need to replace welfare programs. Actually, we need to fix structural gaps and holes in the safety net through which people are falling. And so I think that how guaranteed income can transform these conversations is by actually understanding the mechanisms through which people are left unsupported, and really creating a rallying call and a call to action, as different movements across the US have been supporting their members with cash transfers. And it is that implementation infrastructure, the National Domestic Workers Alliance, COVID Relief Fund, One Fair Wages, Emergency Fund for tipped and service industry workers, mutual aid programs. These are the cash transfer implementation mechanisms that are reaching those who have been underserved by welfare assistance. And the insights from those programs can be leveraged and used to build a more inclusive safety net. And that is what I think is really exciting about this moment.
Thank you so much, Nika, for that, and Yvonne. Both of you touched on very important pieces. I think I'm gonna preach to the choir, and when we think about how uniquely this opportunity of GI can be in terms of how we're thinking about poverty and then how we're thinking about dignity within poverty. Oftentimes I think about the people in my life that have been impacted too, and myself because of the welfare programs and policies. And I remember when my parents decided not to apply for some of these programs that we actually needed because they were ashamed of what others were going to think about us. And seeing all the struggles that even us went through that, and having that lens of like, oh my God, if we access these programs, then we're less than, or we're not working hard enough. So really thinking about how can we begin to dignify poverty and say, listen, you are in this position in your life, but this does not define you. That these policies, if they're going to be created for those that need it, should be created in a way that rethinks and reframes how we think about poverty, cash assistance, and then we start removing the stipulations that condition us as poor people to think that we're not good enough, that we will never be able to leave these spaces, that we don't know how to spend correctly, and that we're in these systems or in these circumstances because of our own choosing, when the reality it isn't so. It's systems that have oppressed us for so many years. So I think that GI allows us to dignify poverty in the way that we haven't thought about it before. So it's exciting to think when we can do that, when we begin to dignify what it is to live paycheck to paycheck.
So good. I don't need to add anything. I would just say a few things because I think all of it has been captured, but I really love that Nabila spoke to what guaranteed income or the impact of guaranteed income on the community itself. I'm really interested in seeing guaranteed income impact movements with people on the ground. And I think when people see a different way of doing things and it becomes more widely practiced in all different areas across the country, they start to divest in things that no longer work for them. They're able to see the juxtaposition between the reality that we're confined to now and what's possible. And so when people start to see that, they get motivated, they get moved in a different way. I'm convinced that our system and its focus on productivity and churning culture, always moving fast, and the restlessness that we move in on a daily basis keep us busy, and it keeps us preoccupied. So I think the powerful part in the way that GI programs are structured is that you do have this narrative. A lot of us are emphasizing rest and regeneration, and the ways in which money and this simple something like $500 can open up new avenues for that within people, and the ways that we take care of ourselves, the ways that we're able to free up our energy and our mental space. So I think it's really powerful when you think about that, and how that can support people and provide a base, a power base that's quite different than what has been available for a long time. People have been organizing and advocating for centuries. But this is really new in that tangible financial support, I think, gives people a different lens and more power. So I'm really interested in that.
All right, thank you all for kind of sharing. We're getting some reactions from the chat about, you know, that this is not, that guaranteed income is not just to transform your lives, but because you are alive, that you are human, you deserve to have your needs met. We're hearing things about solidarity economies, the importance of what economic freedom means and what does that look like, and also replacing internalized shame with internalized dignity, because we know that our current safety net isn't dignified, right? Based on some of the things y'all highlight, right? It's excluded people. It's based on anti-Blackness. It's based on a lot of assumptions of communities that have been harmful, that lead to and allow economic deprivation to happen, but also how guaranteed income can play a role that really fills those gaps and is dignity-centered. So thank y'all for kind of adding a lot of context to it. And again, if people have questions, feel free to share them out. My next question for the panel is, as we're talking about, you know, ways in which guaranteed income can transform our current social safety net, let's think about, like, what are the best ways in which we can design a guaranteed income in California? And so it's a two-part question. It's like, what are the ways in which we can design a guaranteed income in California? And in what ways can we design one across the country? So y'all can answer both questions, any part of it, but really want to get your thoughts of, like, what are the best ways we can design guaranteed income? And anyone can start.
Well, you know, just to start us off, so at Insight, we took a look at the current GI pilots that are happening across California. And we found that there were 27 pilots happening in 10 counties out of 58. So there's a sort of a cluster of, you know, guaranteed income pilots. It's not widespread at this point. And we used a tool called the Family Needs Calculator that looks at the actual cost of living that is based in a certain geography that people need in order to survive. And, you know, that's a lot higher than the poverty level, the federal threshold, and certainly a lot higher than the poverty level as well. So excuse me, the federal minimum wage and the state and the city minimum wage as well, which is not a sustainable floor. And we found that, you know, that 2 million people in California, or 2 out of 5 folks in California, are below the ability to support themselves. And 1.5 million are BIPOC, are Black, Indigenous, people of color. So I would say that you know, in order to design a GI pilot, we need to have a program that first identifies those who most need it. If we're going to design a program that's equity driven, to identify first who needs it the most, and to make sure that the resources are targeted towards those who need it the most, both, you know, here in California as well as nationally.
If I can add to that, when I think about program design, I think both the macro and the micro level, and I think that those have to come from some of the pieces that Yvonne mentioned. I think that part of it is, like, how are we helping policymakers design these programs, and that begins with narrative change and really thinking about how can pilots come together, continue to gather the data that is necessary to quantify the changes that we're seeing in people's lives, right? How are the pilots from, Central California all the way to the coast of California changing people's lives? I think that the more data that we acquire and the more information that we get and we are able to centralize that, the more stories policymakers will have. Ultimately, we have to remember that they are the ones that oftentimes are leading the work at the legislative, at the legislative level. So how can we provide them with the best data, stories for them to begin to think about program design within community context? I think that the more communities of color, the more impacted folks that we have thinking about how the money can be spent or how resources can be developed, I think that it's going to matter. California is already doing an amazing job. A lot of other states are coming to California to learn. And we already know that change has to start at the local level before, we can trickle it down to the federal level. Historically, the federal level has already tried implementing some GI, programs prior to COVID. Back to the Nixon administration, it wasn't so successful. But the more the federal government can learn from local governments, I think that would be really important. So I'm thinking about design programs for me is both thinking the macro and the micro level. And how do we begin to think about those gaps?
Yeah, to add to that, I do often think of micro and macro level, and I also tend to think very hyper locally. So I like the fact that Yvonne brought up the regions in which guaranteed income is happening and the clusters. My dream is to have different regions collaborating on their programs. I know we do that to some degree already, but more intricate and intentional design processes between regions would be amazing in an evolved state. But I do think that there's certainly a foundation where narrative change needs to be present, but I also think the evaluation design can be varied and nuanced. The standard RCT doesn't necessarily work for every population. And I think I'll say too, just going backwards a little bit in my thinking, it should also be designed with the community that you would like to impact or intend to impact and support. And that is going to help you figure out how to best design it for your local context. But I would say as a whole, we need variations. We need RCTs, we need quasi-experimental, we need PAR, participatory action research. I think we need it all, and it needs to be targeted based on who we intend to serve. And ideally, if we have a regional model, or a regional kind of container, we have a lot of different types of programs to kind of pull from and see what works, who's being left out, where the gaps, some of the things that we talked about already. So that's what I would say about that.
I agree, and also have sort of a slightly different angle to how I think about what it would take to implement at the statewide or national scale. I'm a researcher and know how important research and data is to make policy decisions. That being said, if data-informed policy decisions, our COVID response would look much different as a country, right? And so what research questions are we asking when we're looking at the impact of cash? Are we still asking, does giving cash reduce poverty? An answer which we actually intuitively and empirically already know. Are we asking the question around how do we implement this kind of program? Are systems designed in order to be able to reach those who are intentionally excluded from existing welfare programs? And how can we design them to do so? And that, at least for us at Fund for Guaranteed Income, it means figuring out the bureaucracy and designing simple interfaces that work. And so that means partnering with leaders and community organizations that are accountable to and actually in community. And over 35 community organizations partnered to co-design our payments and administration platform, which enables 4 different payment methods folks can choose between at any time, live customer support, case managers that you can chat to on a chat box or a hotline, and an application that takes 90 seconds, which is not designed for the purpose of a research outcome, but really to ensure that people have the dignity that they deserve throughout the entire program process. And I think really what it takes is having that community involvement and intervention, not only in advocating for guaranteed income, which is incredibly important, but also in advocating for how these kinds of programs should be implemented. And it's not lost on me that $35 million is really important for the expansion of the statewide programs. Also, $35 million is what California gave to a bank to disperse prepaid cards for a one-time cash transfer called the middle class tax refund, which is $10 million less, which will be dispersed across 7 programs in California for guaranteed income. And as a disbursement partner, we see that actually only 30% of participants choose prepaid cards. Others want to receive money through Venmo, through PayPal, through direct deposits. And really, those kinds of implementation insights, I think, are incredibly important as we develop and design a new system for cash delivery.
Awesome. Thank you all for kind of sharing. I think everything y'all said is critical to the guaranteed income, to actualizing guaranteed income. I'm going to transition into that question a little bit sooner. I do think research plays an important role, and I think we also need to be intentional about how research is done too, and that's kind of what I'm doing in my training at Hopkins. I'm training in epidemiology, and I'm trying to help design other ways to look at the health effects, or just look at the effects of guaranteed income without using randomized control trials. There's other designs that we can recommend, but also I'm trying to look at the role of implementation science, and specifically what it means to engage communities and people with lived experiences in the process of planning and implementation, and how that could lead to better outcomes. So trying to kind of coalesce and combine some of the things that y'all are doing. And also because I'm doing like my first presentation of my aims, so later today. So just very grounding to hear that like the things that are being spoken from this panel as we imagine the future of guaranteed income is kind of tied to what I also hope to do in this work. So to kind of tie, and I see Anna's question in the chat, and I'm gonna have y'all marinate on that question because I'm gonna ask it next after this one. So we're hearing that there's, well, we know, right, that there's the $35 million guaranteed income pilot project from California. We saw that it was allocated in the budget last year. They finally decided the recipients of those who would get funded. But there's also been a lot of conversation on the GIPP expansion. This was also discussed in this symposium too, a little earlier, I believe yesterday. So I'm wondering, as we kind of lean into expansions and thinking about how we could design guaranteed income programs, what are kind of like the directions you see for the GIPP expansion if we were to do an additional expansion? So just throwing that out there. What do y'all think? So what are y'all thinking about the GIPP expansion? What should it look like? What should it include? Because I think those are the conversations that are happening right now with some of our folks.
Well, I think we have, for the GIPP expansion, we have one of the recipients of the expansion grant on the panel with us, which is so wonderful. Congratulations. I would love to hear you speak more to the program that you're designing, but I think, from what I understand, having a targeted, you're thinking about a targeted program for a particular sort of occupational grouping, it would be really important. I know we've done a lot of research on occupational segregation and how, you know, women of color, Black women, Latinx women are really segregated into low wage jobs. And that's what sort of welfare reform, you know, when Clinton delivered the end of welfare as we know it in 1996, that's the situation it created. People are being pushed out of the safety net and into crappy low wage jobs that keep them into a permanent state of being, you know, sort of the part of the working poor class. And so I think, you know, thinking about what are the jobs that, you know, women, you know, Black women, Latinx women, poor, you know, people of color, where are they targeted into? And what we find is that there's a lot of people that are concentrated in the care economy as well. So targeting folks in those professions, I think, was really important. But I would love to also hear more from Nabila about what are your plans?
Yes, absolutely. Thank you for that, Yvonne. So we are honored that we were one of the organizations that was granted, you know, some of the funds through that GI expansion that Sir Lee just mentioned. And although I am not in the space of the program design, nor was I involved in, like, you know, the application, I do know that it's for pregnant people with diabetes, and we're doing it through a partnership with Kaiser. So it's not so much as an occupational focus as it is about thinking about caregiving and how we're thinking about helping those that are most in need. We have a lot of research on understanding how much diabetes actually is a burden when we think about health disparities. So when we thought about thinking about how can GI come into the space, to try to think how we can alleviate some of those burdens that are like related to health impact and the health outcomes. So the intervention, from what I understand, and I'm more than happy to provide additional information as I come to understand it, and just, like, you know, do more research and find out more about from our programs team. I do know that it's going to be for 18 months, and the folks are going to be giving $1,000, and we're going to provide the help for 150 pregnant women. Now, even within our own evolution of our agency, we started our first GI pilot with 12 people, and it was money that the board decided to allocate. So we literally, like, you know, put all the money that we had for programs to really think about GI. And it was through that small micro pilot, which was cash for caregivers, that we gave 12 female in Northeast LA. And that led us to secure funding with the city of West Hollywood for us a much larger guaranteed income. And that one was for 25 low-income seniors living in the city of West Hollywood. And under that, we then were able to think about additional micropilots, and that's how we came to secure these, you know, this much larger, grant. So with that, even the evolution of our own understanding of GI allows us to really think of, like, if we can start with a baby pilot and now be granted and be honored to be in the space with amazing leaders to think about how we think about dignity and how we think about health outcomes, speaks about the evolution of the movement, but even just about the evolution of organizations like ourselves that were brave and that wanted to think about poverty and solutions to poverty differently. And you know, as we continue to create the program and really, like, understand how this is going to impact the communities that we serve, we will be more than happy to share, you know, some of the findings, and how we continue to leverage to secure additional funding is going to be very important for us in our narrative piece. How do we use the, you know, the seed money that we were given? As Nika mentioned, probably not a lot if we think about all the money California has, but how can this be somewhat of a vehicle to get us to a greater amount of money for a larger group of populations?
Awesome.
I'll
Kia?
chime
Go ahead.
in. Oh, I'll chime in
Go
really
ahead.
quickly. It's kind of, it's both difficult to answer simply because I am excited to see what these funded programs will do with the state funding. And at the same time, for some background on our organization, our first pilot was launched prior to the state funding being budgeted. We were actually funded by CDSS prior to that even coming online, which is why we didn't go for the state funding. The state funding was announced soon after. So our first program was simply about getting things rolling in our region and really introducing the idea to our local elected officials, to the public. We worked with MGI and Mayors for Guaranteed Income and the Center for Guaranteed Income Research, with UPenn, University of Pennsylvania, randomized controlled trial, 150 families, $500 a month for 2 years. And that was our sort of our flagship. And then we started to iterate on this and partner with our county government. We're working with our Child Welfare Services Department to work with families who are at risk of entering foster care or becoming CWS involved. And so we are currently in the planning and design phases for that program. And, you know, our long-term goal there is to sort of think about how do we impact child welfare services policy. At the local level, obviously the federal level, there are things that need to change to better support families upstream and not have to steward them through the system that is very costly and also overwhelmingly negatively impacts the children and the families. So there's that program, and then we kind of have a layered program that's called the Black Women's Resilience Project that we're launching next year too, that looks at cash plus supportive services for Black women and their families. And what services pair well with guaranteed income is what we hope to discover. Adding culturally relevant services that focus on self-efficacy, that, you know, chip away at the centuries of degradation for the Black community specifically, and do it with community-based resources, and then hopefully iterate on that for other marginalized populations locally. And then lastly, we have one more program that's a direct cash transfer that is a lump sum program. So about 2,000 or so families will get a lump sum of cash next year. And this is in conjunction with the other programs that we're doing. So I say all that to say, it's really interesting to kind of think about the evolution of GI in the state, because I really feel like if not the next expansion, the ones following really need to look at some of the economic mobility aspects, which does include targeted focus on occupation. I so agree with that, and how we can help people not be relegated to those low-wage jobs, but really, most importantly, help them craft a vision for their lives. And what does that entail? Is it care work, or is that what was left, or is it something else? And how do we better create a bridge from point A to point B? And I think cash is definitely a part of that, but there's also the community, and there's also other resources that will be necessary. So I'm really interested in how the state funding can be leveraged in that way to support programs and organizations like ours that have a huge portfolio of other services, including a migrant shelter that supports asylum seekers. We have older adult services. And in my role, with my lens, I'm really looking at how to infuse cash and also be that bridge to other economic supports and ultimately socioeconomic mobility. So that's us.
And so the question is, how do we call for additional sources of state and federal funding to further expand these programs, and also how do we tie that expansion to advocacy? We are running 2 programs that are actually funded through ARPA dollars, so federally funded, one in Long Beach, then one in Sonoma County, which is across 5 different cities. And then, so that there are some sources of federal funding that are coming online for guaranteed income programs. We started with the Compton Pledge, which is not funded through public dollars, and that's delivering funds to 800 residents in Compton, California. And our approach with the Compton Pledge, I think, speaks to our organization's approach to how do we tie this policy to broader calls for social justice. And who pledged to our program looks a lot different than the Giving Pledge. It's movements who are pledging to this vision. So One Fair Wage, Black Lives Matter, National Domestic Workers Alliance, SE Justice Group, National Council for Incarcerated and Formerly Incarcerated Women, who are collaborating around an economic policy design. And what we do is, as we go after these government contracts to help think about the existing systems and how we can intervene in them, we also are building systems with and for community-based organizations. So for example, we are the implementation partner for the Chicago Future Fund, led by Equity and Transformation in Chicago, which is delivering funds to formerly incarcerated residents in West Garfield Park. We're also partnering with the National Council of Incarcerated and Formerly Incarcerated Women and Girls to deliver the first, and we are delivering the first guaranteed income program to currently incarcerated people. And thinking towards a system that can disrupt the for-profit industry that takes $10 for every $100 that is sent to people who are incarcerated for no reason other than for profit. And so that's to say that our perspective is that in order to really think about a broader advocacy movement, I think it's important to divest from things that no longer work and to frame guaranteed income as actually a public safety intervention, because the punitive mechanisms of the welfare state are really the other side of the coin from the punitive mechanisms of the carceral state. So California, with its incredibly outsized population of incarcerated people, in LA County, with the largest jail system in the world, the largest sheriff's department in the world. It's really striking to me that there were 600,000 people who applied in LA County to a 1,000 person program. There's also 600,000 people in LA County who are experiencing the threat of houselessness. And so when we have the poverty, which is becoming increasingly visible, it often articulates itself in media and in other spaces as a fear of crime, which is a justification for funding public safety interventions that actually don't keep communities and societies safe. And the more studies and data and programs that emphasize the fact that the root causes of harm in society is the criminalization of poverty, not just the reality of it, the criminalization of it. And the interventions that work to further criminalize poverty. Actually, if we can unlock those dollars to invest directly in people and to invest directly in communities, it's really possible to see how the richest state in the world, it should be unjustifiable that we have a crisis of both incarceration and of inequality and of houselessness.
All right, thank you, Nika. So I feel like you really kind of, well, everyone, thank you for kind of sharing about your reflection on what's happening in the GIPP expansion. And I think Nika kind of is leading us a little bit more to the discourse on the federal level, right? Which is what I think Anna's question was getting at, right? Are there examples of leveraging existing federal funding by GI pilots? Or goals for the future to draw on federal dollars, because we want to start thinking about how federal funding for GI programs is also critical. I think there's also and making sure that those investments from the federal level are being applied at the state level and our local levels. So I think, Nika, you touched on it too, but I don't know if you want to add a little bit more. But I welcome others to kind of talk about how, what are some examples, what are ways that we can begin to hold, I guess, the federal government accountable to really give us support support and resources to provide guaranteed income for our community. So I think that was Anna's question. And Anna, if you want to chime in, let me know. But wondering what are your reflections from the panel? And then I see Julia's question too, which I'm actually going to bring in a little later. Oops, no, not me. Don't pin me.
Well, again, maybe to start us off, I just want to sort of, echo what Mika had shared. I think that we spend far more on criminalizing poor people and looking for instance, welfare fraud. I think, I think welfare fraud is actually between 1% to 5% of actual cases, and yet we spend, 3 times the amount of what's actually sort of taken in order to prosecute and to find these things. And then just also the overlap between the two systems, welfare and criminal justice system. I think that money could be shifted and brought into what actually makes our communities whole and well, and not about, building out the carceral state. So I think that's a source of federal funding that we could look to. I think also, I think when have we ever received, resources from the state? It's always through the pressure of social movements. It's always through the pressure of people demanding things. I mean, that's how we first got, welfare to begin with, the aid to dependent children. It's through progressive folks advocating for mothers' pensions and for, widowed women to be supported. It's how, we've received the Social Security Act during the Great Depression, because unemployed people came together and advocated, for things which did exclude, as Mika had mentioned, farm workers and domestic workers, but that was also later revised to some extent, but again, through the pressures. So I think, for us to make pilots into policy and to make it nationwide, we need to build a strong movement of poor people, of poor women, of poor mothers to demand this as a right.
I completely agree, and I think some ways to think about federal advocacy. I often think about what are the most sort of ambitious ideas we could collectively be moving towards. Postal banking, thinking about Section 8 vouchers. How can guaranteed income be a supplement, and that actually HUD is thinking about and moving towards? And how do we actually grapple with the federal, state, countywide welfare programs and their eligibility requirements? How confusing it is. For example, supplemental SSI, which is incredibly restrictive, and cash transfer payments really count as unearned income. And the worst case scenarios, even somebody participating in a pilot could be kicked off of SSI. And there's an IRS regulation that says that guaranteed income payments don't count as unearned income if it is from a federally funded program. At the same time, at the state level, there's CalFresh and CalWorks exemptions that say guaranteed income payments do not count as income if it is a privately and federally funded program. And so program administrators are sort of choosing, okay, should we kick people off of CalFresh, CalWorks, or SSI, which is really a decision that nobody should have to make, and only comes to the fore when you look at each of these existing programs' eligibility requirements, how income is calculated, and really help navigate that maze. And I think for federal advocacy to really be effective, it requires a deeper thinking of what programs exist, how they have been designed, and how those designs can actually become more inclusive, and what mechanisms federal programs use to deliver funds. So if it's checks in the mail, is there a reason why it has to be checks in the mail? Are we receiving $600 checks because the IRS coded that system on COBOL, and that's a coding language that's too old, and we couldn't change it in order to change the number? And so, I think with with technology, but also with the momentum that is built with these citywide pilots. It can really make a case for local interventions moving federally and moving nationally if there's an implementation solution that can solve these persistent bottlenecks to real resource delivery.
Go ahead, Kia. I was gonna be like, anything from Kia, Nabila?
Just gonna add one more thing, just because we have, for one of our programs, a partnership with our county child welfare department. And even though we are currently in the planning and design phases of this, which will incorporate additional community input, it's really kind of designing the program and the evaluation to try and accomplish some policy outcomes and also identify funding sources, already existing funding sources that could fund it long term. And so while we're still in discussions, I feel like some of the funding dedicated to TANF, particularly for child welfare, can be repurposed for cash transfer programs and direct support to families, and thinking about other funding streams, social services block grants and others, that we can really look at and infuse in different ways, even if it's as it typically is, pass through the state. How do we identify and leverage things that already exist to kind of provide this additional layer of support? So as we're thinking about this stuff, because we know, to kind of answer Anna's question, the ARPA dollars that kicked off two of our programs, the lump sum program itself and also the child welfare services program, it's not going to last forever. We have a runway, but we're also kind of strategizing on a plan locally that would make sense, and have some of our really influential systems partners on board to create those policies, figure out those funding streams, which will be a mixture of local and federal.
If I can just add, I think that Nika, Kia, and Yvonne said it best. And I think that, for me, and when I think about the federal government, I always think about how slow they are to act. I mean, historically, it's always the federal government that oftentimes it's a gridlock that doesn't move a lot of policies. We know that they're not the best at doing that. But if we think about it, two of the biggest GI really like guaranteed income movements or solutions that they came with was through the pandemic, right? It was like the direct checks that we all received, and it was the child tax credit. And I think that the more we're able to connect those and show them, because that's what they need to understand that these are guaranteed income. These are solutions to really give the money to those that need it. The more that we're able to make those connections, and like Yvonne said, oftentimes this is going to fall on advocates, on community organizing, on movement, on the people on the ground, folks like us and folks that are being impacted day in and day out, to show the changes and the impact of policies at the federal level. I think that having California and having, amazing policies right now and amazing pilots throughout California is allowing for GI to be thought as a way of like shifting welfare policies and welfare systems. But the last thing I'll say is that oftentimes all of these ideas on guaranteed income and thinking about poverty different, you can learn a lot from other countries in which these are the ways that we have been working through poverty in low-income countries, in developing countries where, there are other ways of thinking about poverty, and these other ways of establishing mobility. So I think that taking a step back and one, as leaders of the movement, continuing to make those connections for the federal government is going to matter, and saying to them, hey, child tax credit is guaranteed income. how do we move the resources to the right places, and we start disrupting the systems in that way. I think that is one of the things that we need to do at the federal level.
Thank you, Nabila, and everyone who shared. So I was hearing the importance of California and the pilots that we're doing here in creating the evidence needed to shape the policy to kind of hold the federal government accountable to actualizing guaranteed income at scale. For us to think about other ways, our social safety net, such as Section 8 or HUD, is thinking about including guaranteed income or being a little bit more flexible. So really thinking about how guaranteed income can interrupt what is happening on the federal level, and also shape what's happening at the federal level as it leads to more flexible dollars and more access for our communities. But also really talking about how ARPA was one of those moments where we had a lot of autonomy to distribute money to communities, but knowing that that's going to change, to really think about what systems are currently existing and what are the gaps there, and how I know some of the current benefits programs are thinking about guaranteed income. So thank y'all for sharing. I think we have a couple of questions around narrative, which was also the question I was going to ask and lead to. So I'll center us with Julia's question, which is which asks, what have you seen work well from the larger narrative change work? What messages are resonating, and with whom, and how are you thinking about communication strategy in the next few years? If money and resources weren't an issue, what would you like the narrative campaign look like? So there's multiple questions. Let me break that down. So it's one, thinking about what are the larger narrative change efforts that we have seen? What do those messages look like, right? And how, what have been those communication strategies? And if we had unlimited resources, what would a narrative change campaign look like for the future of guaranteed income? I'll let y'all marinate on that. That's a lot, but good questions.
I can start maybe with one example of how we communicate about our programs. I think it's often a tension in the nonprofit world between sharing about the impact of a program versus falling into the same sort of tropes of that strip people of their agency and really are geared towards promoting a program versus really being authentic to people's experiences. So with the Compton Pledge, we have a storytelling cohort called the Voices of Compton Pledge, where they really talk about the impact of the program, or not, on their own terms. And we meet with the group every couple of months, and we did a Love Letters to Compton campaign. We have a report that came out from this cohort, a documentary that is coming out shortly. And if we had, if money was not an issue and we had all the resources in the world, I've thought about this a lot. I think the show Made, I'm not sure if anyone has watched that, it did a really powerful job of decoding what it really looks like to navigate the welfare system. And I think that is a piece of the puzzle that, is a mix between a research project and a narrative change project, in the sense that, how do we communicate that guaranteed income is necessary, not only because people need additional funds, which is an easier story and a quicker story for communicating the impact of a pilot, but actually we need guaranteed income because the systems we have today aren't working. And this is what it's like to navigate them. And this is the application form for TANF. And this is the application form for food stamps. And this is the food that you can and cannot buy with your Fresh EBT card. And I think the more that sort of seeps into the public consciousness, the more evident it will become that we need something that is less bureaucratic and that is empowering people via the process of receiving support beyond just the fact that they have received support? What does it look like to really navigate that system? What is the time tax on people who are forced to navigate the system, waiting in line, filling out long applications, taking long surveys? And I think that would be my dream.
If I can add to that, I think that when I think about messaging, I think, again, both macro and micro level. As an organization, we do a lot of our messaging work through narrative change, and we do that through our advocacy training project, which is giving communities that are being impacted, that are GI recipients, not only of our own pilots, but other pilots and other programs, the ability to understand and tell their story and show their humanity through their experience. To us, that's very important as we think about longevity in the movement, and we think about ways in which we're going to secure additional funding for GI. It starts with folks. It starts with telling and allowing folks to tell their story the best way they can, and that goes through that dignity and that really thinking about that lens and the way in which we are allowing them to share their stories. So for us, narrative change and messaging matters, and it matters the way in which we are providing the skills and the resources and the information for those that are being impacted. Messaging also matters in how we're telling the stories and who we're telling the stories to. So then we think about how are we meeting with legislators, how are we meeting with policymakers, and telling those stories. How are we thinking about poverty different? How do we ensure that our stories with our advocates are showing poverty in the different ways in which poverty exists, right? Poverty is not a one fit all. It's very, it varies from person to person, from experience to experience, whether that person is a pregnant person or someone who has been recently incarcerated. Poverty looks different for every person, and stories of poverty look quite different. So through that lens, how do we continue to expand that storytelling, the narrative piece? How do we dignify those stories? How do we ensure that people are not being tokenized matters to us? And we do that in the way in which we train and we provide the skills that are necessary for people to tell their stories and their own truth, that they're not just used as another sad story, but that their story allows people to see the transformation piece. So to us, that matters. If we had all the money in the world, I think that we would, I think I think we would create even more micro pilot programs, because what we're seeing is that with our own small cohorts of groups, we're seeing so much transformation. So if we could just magnify that and transform the lives of tens of thousands of people in LA and throughout California, I think that we would do that. I think that we believe in GI because we are seeing it in our small pockets of 12 women being transformed. So the more we're able to be in this movement, the more those small stories are going to become our guiding force, and are going to be able to be replicated at a larger scale.
Just to add to that, because the questions are really good ones about what works well. That I don't know that I can completely answer, just because we're in the stages of implementation for our narrative change work. We have about 12 families from our first program that are participating in this process. And I guess, what's working well for us is the interconnectedness that we're creating between this cohort in particular, and as part of our narrative change work, creating kind of a mixed media art project. There will be some audio, visual, and written components of the art project that we're creating with this particular cohort, and tackling some core narratives that are really entrenched, particularly in America, around the American dream and dreaming, and creating a counter narrative or a different picture, just a different picture about what that looks like here in this country specifically, and breaking down ideas about productivity, work being synonymous with value, deservedness, who deserves to rest, and what rest provides, and also tackling individualism, which I think we do tangibly by the act of connecting our people together through this experience, and then broadly emphasizing that, those narratives about how we're all, entities, meritocracy is kind of woven in there. We're all separate entities working really hard, and somehow we make this dream happen. Really illustrating through the cohort and the process, by which we come together monthly, and talk about not only the program, but just our lives, and know that we are interconnected and our experiences are connected, is a really exciting piece of it. So I know it's working well for us and it's empowering us. I think, when we do move to the phase of communications outward, externally, I'm really excited to see what that looks like, because these narratives are so pervasive in our communities. And also, the last thing I'll add and can't forget is anti-Blackness, and narratives around that really underlie, again, the creation of public policy like the social safety net, which was mentioned a few times, and really is in every aspect of the services, from the nonprofit realm, for-profit realm. It's really all encompassing to really unpack that through the lives of women and the families that we serve, is one that's deep, because we still have a race problem here in America. And I think guaranteed income, cash transfer, this type of work, this narrative change work, is directly addressing it. So I'm excited about a few pieces of that project, and digging more into those entrenched narratives and the values attached to them.
Thank you. Yvonne, did you go? Did you go already? Sorry, I wasn't sure.
I didn't, but I don't have anything to add. Yeah, thanks.
Okay, awesome. Thank you, everyone. I think that, we are kind of coming to a close. I did want to highlight the importance that we were talking about around ensuring that the narrative work is about centering the communities on the ground. What are the stories that what are the stories that we're hearing, the importance of those stories, also talking about the complexity of our current social safety net system, how there's so many barriers and burdens to get access, the idea of the time tax, and why it's important that we have more autonomy for communities, but also the importance of just thinking about what it means to dismantle or resist the individualism, right? And how it's important for us to collectively come together, to rest, to have our needs met, and making sure that our needs are met where we don't always have to prove that we're worthy or deserving of basic needs. So thank you all for all sharing. We do have time for one more question, and I guess we could wrap it out. Since our panel is about the future of guaranteed income, Andrea had a good question about what legislation would you love to see passed in 2023. So I'll leave it there, and we have about a couple of minutes for y'all to wrap things up.
The Breathe Act and the Raise the Wage Act.
Can you say more?
Do you want to talk about that a little bit more, Nika?
Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah. People, some might know, but others might not. You said that so quick. You're like, yes. I'm like, yes. But can you talk about that more?
So we passed the Compton Pledge is a local resolution of the Breathe Act. The Breathe Act is legislation developed by the Movement for Black Lives and Civil Rights Corps. That's a comprehensive legislation, or really the modern day Civil Rights Act. And guaranteed income is actually a part of it. It's in Section 3 of the Breathe Act as a part of an economic justice agenda. And I think that kind of comprehensive legislation that does touch upon the divest invest model, that does touch upon a broader notion of community safety, is really necessary in order to frame guaranteed income as a part of a larger movement. The Raise the Wage Act and the Fight for 15 and the end of the sub-minimum wage for tipped and service industry workers, I think, is inherently connected to the case for guaranteed income and the case for including those who have been, who are ineligible for unemployment, who are ineligible for workers' protections, and really highlighting the case for an income floor. So I think, oftentimes, sometimes minimum wage versus guaranteed income are pitted against each other in a way that isn't true to the interconnectedness between these issues. And I think that the movements around the Breathe Act and the movements around raising the minimum wage are not separate from the movement for guaranteed income. And I think the more connections and bridges we can build with those leaders and with those bases, the higher chances we have of really matching what sometimes is the political will at the level of an elected official with the pressure from voters and from people who are mobilized to make change now more than ever.
I would also love to see pass a National Domestic Worker Bill of Rights. There have been some great ordinances passed at the local level, I think in Seattle, for instance, and I think California has a version. But those are domestic workers being house cleaners, childcare workers, home care workers, folks that are often preempted from wage and hour protections. So having additional rights guaranteed to them at the federal level would be incredible. I think having something similar for farm workers, who are also another excluded occupation, would be amazing. And then also I think the latest version of the act that would help people organize was the PRO Act, Protecting the Right to Organize Act. We need to build a stronger labor movement to protect people, working people. And so, enabling people to form unions in an easier way would be really great.
I echo Nika's sentiment on the Breathe Act and additional funding for GI programs. I know that there are some elected officials that are thinking creatively about that. So really thinking what is going to be introduced this year. And then additional work around reproductive justice at the federal level is what we're hoping to see this upcoming year.
I would love to see all of those. And also, I want to see more programs or, legislation around entrepreneurship, economic development, specifically cooperative development, selfishly because I am interested in that, but also because it's power building. And I feel like that's an element of some of the movement around guaranteed income that's often overlooked is, the ways in which giving people money gives people power. And when people have power, the bargaining table raises and everything else is elevated. So I would love to see more investments, legislation, some intent around supporting, worker-owned businesses, worker-owned collaboratives, and that sort of thing to focus on labor training and economic development.
Awesome. Thank you, everyone, our wonderful panelists, So thank you, Nika, Kia, Nabila, Yvonne. Y'all did a great job. We are coming to a close, and I loved how y'all ended about thinking not just about the role of guaranteed income, but also how it intersects with other issues, right? That it is like issues of racism, worker rights, right? Because we don't live single issue lives, right? We know that we live very complex and intersectional lives. And I appreciate how you are being intentional about the role guaranteed income plays and uplifting and contributing to the movement of not just guaranteed income, but a more like economically just like world, right? And I just wanted to appreciate y'all for also just being here, and also to our participants who are here with us today. Thank you also for your questions and your engagement. It was extremely helpful. So thank y'all for all being here. And Andrea, I don't know if you wanted to do any closing or any other things for us.
Yes, thank you so much, Silverly. As always, you are such a great facilitator and space holder for a wonderful conversation. Stick around at 10:30. We're going to have what should be a really good discussion about the political landscape that we're all facing in 2023. We've got some amazing panelists there, and it should be a really rich discussion. Then at 11:30, we will actually turn to setting CABC's policy priorities for next year. I am dropping in the chat the link so that you can weigh in, ask questions, because we will have the sponsors of legislation available to answer your questions and provide more information on these particular topics. I definitely want to add the Breathe Act, some of the other legislation that was mentioned here. You know, we're a work in progress always. And so we adapt to as we learn what we can participate in and support. So thank you again for making our movement so rich and so wonderful and so ambitious. And I love y'all. I love your insights so much. And see you soon in the next sessions. Have a great rest of the symposium.
Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you. Take care.
Thank
everyone.
you.
Thank you.